Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you all to Neil Dhar. Neil Dhar is the vice chairman and co head of consulting at PwC. He also sits on the firm's management committee. In his role, he's responsible for helping clients identify value and design and deliver large scale business led change from strategy to outcomes, specifically in the areas of M&A deals, transformation, cybersecurity, privacy and risk, cloud and digital, and tax consulting. Notably, Neil has been with PwC for more than 30 years. He's held various leadership roles across different service lines, including M&A deals, risk assurance, advisory, and consulting solutions. PwC is one of the leading professional service networks in the world. PwC and its firms have offices in 152 countries and employ more than 364,000 people who provide assurance, tax, and advisory services to 87% of global Fortune 500 companies. So thanks for coming on the show, Neil.
Thank
What a
you,
hype
Rick.
man, right, Neil? He should come with you everywhere. Everywhere you go.
I'm gonna bring Rick to my parents tomorrow. Actually, my
Right.
dad's always asking me, "What do you do again?" I'm gonna bring Rick tomorrow.
Right, bring him in. Yeah, that was good. You know what? But it's so interesting that you were there for 30 years because I've run a search firm, and for 20 plus years, and it's so uncommon. What's the secret sauce? Like, why did you stay there for so long? Because you're a smart guy, you could go anywhere. What kept you there?
You know, let me start with a little story. So I was out to dinner with a couple of my college buddies a couple of months ago, and they asked the same question in a little bit more crude way, but same thing, like what happened and why have you been stuck at the same place for 30 years? And I reframed the conversation quickly and said, first of all, what I do, I love. And I think that's so important, that we all spend so much time doing our work, and work in my mind needs to be a career. And with that, I learned a long time ago that if you get up 95% of the time and feel good about going to work, you're probably in the right place. And I'm a lot higher than 95%. And that's why I've stayed as long as I have. I've done a lot of different things. Although I've been under the PwC umbrella for 30 years, I've done a whole host of things. I've worked in 4 cities. I've worked in multiple sectors. I actually started out as an auditor, a job I loved because I got to see things through very different lenses. I found myself in Europe doing M&A work, and I became an M&A junkie. I love the deal markets and getting a high from helping companies do transaction work. I lived in the Midwest for a number of years and worked on a number of different, industrial and consumer markets companies. And then I've been in New York for the last 10 years, working in the private equity sector, within the financial services sector. And then, as you said, Rick, most recently, for the last 3 years, I've been running our consulting business, which is a phenomenal business that does a lot of different things, as you very eloquently went through. So Jack, to your point, I just have a great time doing what I'm doing. I get to meet with incredible clients that are doing aspirational and cutting edge things, and then on the other side of our business, developing people. I get to work each and every day with some of the smartest people, on the universe. And I'm able to get that intellectual high every day, both from our clients and from our people.
Well, firstly, to your buddies, did you give that humble brag, like what they say about being there, like, I happen to be the vice chair? so before you bust my chops, hey, I'm at a pretty nice level here. And I'm sure you get paid pretty well. So I think they should kind of, be quiet a little bit there. But
yeah. I've known these guys for almost 40 years. And
wow.
No, I do not get that.
So, how to help people maybe get some insight. Are you the one who like raise your hand to do all these different things? Or is it that you just like work super hard and you're really effective and then people notice you? Do you have a mentor, sponsor, coach? Are there other ways? Because there has to be some ways that internally you keep moving that make this happen.
I will tell you. So I get this question a lot, guys, about what would you tell your younger self, right? Like some principles you tell your younger
Yeah.
self. I'd like to think I'm not that old to begin with, but I get that question a lot around what would I tell my younger self? I say I am young still. Um, but and I answer this question consistently. I think there's three things that everyone who's starting their career should really think about and potentially embrace. One is be intellectually curious. Be intellectually curious because that will sort of allow you to grow and see different things. And on a related point, be open to different experiences. Like embrace different experiences. And it may come in a lot of different formats. Working in a different industry, in a different company, in a different part of the country, but different experiences really round out our resume. And then lastly, and I think going to the heart of what you talked about, is I'm a product of phenomenal mentors, sponsors, advocates, truth tellers. Like, and I used all those words because they all mean slightly different, but they're all in that bucket of helping. And as I think about it, like I've been really, really lucky to have great advocates, sponsors, mentors, truth tellers that helped me develop. And I tell every young professional that think about those three things and figure out how to bring those three things to life, and you'll have a very fruitful career in whatever you choose to do, and whatever you choose to do.
Now, how do you find that? Like, how do you seek out a mentor, or do mentors seek out you? And then what's a truth teller too? I'm not really familiar with that term.
Okay. So the how do you find your board of directors, mentors,
Mm,
sponsors, advocates, truth tellers? I think in many ways you have to be conscious about looking for people to help. I think naturally, Jack, relationships develop over time. So in our firm, we have very structured ways, right? We call them relationship leaders or formal mentors. But then also, when you're working with people, you just naturally build bonds, right?
mhm.
And you bring those to life. And where I am in my career now, it's actually interesting. So I have mentors, sponsors, advocates, truth tellers that are both in the firm and then outside of the firm. For instance, I have clients now that have turned into incredible sponsors, mentors, advocates, truth tellers, are retired partners, others, clients that I dealt with 15 years ago that I still keep in touch with. So I think the wider you build your network, the wider you build your network, it'll be more natural to have this board of directors, as I call it, or board of advisors, however you want to call it. But I think you got to be conscious about it. I think you got to conscious about it, and I think you got to embrace both formal and informal channels. On your second question around a truth teller is someone that like tells you what you need to hear. I think a lot of times we're in environments where people tell you what you want to hear, and especially the more senior you are. What I look for are people that tell me what I need to hear, right? And that may range in a whole different ways. Like maybe that meeting didn't go all that well, right? Maybe you should have phrased it in this manner versus the way you did it. Hey, that meeting we had, did everyone participate, right? Like those are the types of things that make you better. Like I'm a big believer that feedback is a gift. And I think sometimes, especially we're all busy, we're all running, that it's not good enough just to say, great job, and off you go, right? Like I do think it's good to dig and actually get to the heart of how we could all get better. Like I'm a big believer of continuous improvement. And I think real truth telling will drive continuous improvement.
That's
Now,
great.
how do you get to a level where you're comfortable with continuous improvement, right? I think sometimes some of our listeners, they work at ultra competitive environments, let's say Amazon or Google, where employee feedback is so important to whether they can get a promotion, get a raise, or even stay at the firm. How do you kind of build that armor or build that trust with your peers or your managers or your clients to be able to get to that level? Because it seems pretty integral to kind of where you are today in terms of being able to kind of stand up and be recognized.
Rick, I think a lot of it comes down to culture. The culture that you're in will dictate if you're really driving productive feedback. I call it feedback as a gift
Mm,
versus feedback that's candidly not very specific and works its way through as more of a check the box type of exercise. So I think culture will drive that whole feeling of actually giving feedback in a way that you become better. So I'll give you an example. My boss, the CEO of our firm, um, I've worked for him for the last 6 years. Great guy, great guy. I've learned so much from him. When he does my feedback, like we talk about the good stuff, right? Of course, we all want to talk about the the good stuff, but he'll spend time with me on things where I could develop and do better. And honestly, the first time that I had that conversation, you get taken back a little bit around getting it, but actually it makes you better and stronger and shows you kind of where and how you could improve and and um and now I encourage it. I want it. Like that actually makes me better. And I think you got to get into that mindset around feedback as a gift. And I think once you get there, then I think naturally all the right things happen.
Rick, just out of curiosity, do you have that where you are? Do you have like mentors and sponsors
I
and
do.
tutors?
Yeah, no, I've been very fortunate to have been able to find like the CEO at Blind, where we just have really candid conversations,
Mhm.
and it's really about like immediate feedback. And so sometimes he'll pull me aside after a certain meeting, and he'll say, "Hey, you presented these two slides. It didn't go over well. Why do you think that is?" And he'll actually coach me through it. And he'll never say like, "Hey Rick, you bombed when you presented these two slides and you lost a lot of confidence."
Yeah.
He'll never suggest it, but we'll go through it. He'll first seek to understand, what was my logic and where was my state going into it, and then we'll go from there. And he'll actually, coax it out of me, and we'll get to the same conclusion. And at the end, he'll say, "Oh, well, here's the end result, and here's what we can do to kind of improve going forward." Um, Another thing is, I'm a PR person where I work internally as basically a team of one. I have a colleague in Korea that primarily works there because it's such a huge market for us. But otherwise, I'm quite alone, and so there's not that kind of teamwork in the sense of someone that like truly is in the trenches that gets it. And so I've been able to kind of find other heads of PR that are kind of in a similar situation and kind of build that network of, solo practitioners that we kind of create a team of our own.
So that's interesting, right? You like, because it sounds like you have that too, where it doesn't necessarily have to be in your company. You could find, for the people watching now and watch it, later on, is that you could find people outside of your company and I guess reach out to them and ask, yeah, what is it awkward to reach out to someone and say, hey, listen, I like Rick, when you do it, do you just reach out and say, hey, I'd like to have a mentor. I could use some help in coaching. Is that it? Just be a little vulnerable and tell them like, I would like some help. Is that how it could work?
I mean, maybe it's specific to my
Yeah.
personality, but I try to be really humble and almost
Hmm.
have like kind of a child's like approach to
Right.
things, right? Where a child doesn't know, oh, well, this guy's a CEO or this is a president, so it might not be appropriate. There's not that like politics that's kind of hanging over your shoulder,
Mm.
but saying like, hey, I'm gonna reach out to this person If they're going to tell me no, that's fine. Or if they're not going to respond, I'll just move on and, we'll call it a day. But I'll actually reach out and say, hey, I've been following your career, or I saw this Bloomberg piece where you're quoted as the spokesperson. You're clearly the head of PR at this huge company. This is what I do. Can we chat? And you'd be very surprised at the number of people that would say yes. I got my start in PR because there was a new head of PR who used to work at Tesla, working with Elon Musk, which I thought was so cool. And this was, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I reached out and said, what was it like working in PR for Elon Musk? And how did you get into tech PR? Because that's what I wanted to do. Back then I was working in lobbying. And she took a chance. She said, oh, I have so many stories to tell you. I can't do it online because I would just be typing all day. Why don't we have coffee? Why don't we have lunch? And I'll tell you some of the stories, and I'll get to know you. And it ended up being, my shot into PR through that lunch. And so, it's always worthwhile to kind of like shoot your shot. There's been other conversations where I've reached out to people and dead silence. And then
Yeah. And Neil, is that what happens in part where you kind of, as a management consultant, reach out to different companies that maybe you admire and say, hey, do you need some help in X, Y, and Z? And similarly to what, Rick was saying, but in your frame of a management consultant, say, hey, I really respect, love your company and what you do. Maybe we could help because you saw, because you noticed something online or something that they could have improvement, and just feel comfortable reaching out. Is that how it works in part?
And maybe let me make it personal first, kind of where
Sure.
Rick went, and then I'll
Yeah.
go on the macro from a business standpoint. So one of the things I've found is the wider your network is internally and externally, the more avenues you have to get to people to seek advice and input and counsel. And what I've been pleasantly surprised is, generally speaking, successful people want to give back and help. Like that, I've found that pretty consistently. And as I've taken on more senior roles within our firm and in the business community in general, what I've found is every time I've reached out to an individual to seek input, advice, hey, how did you deal with an issue like this? I'm thinking about this. What do you think? They reach back out immediately to actually offer their insights, right? And I think generally speaking, people want to share their experiences. People want to sort of help the next generation avoid the potholes maybe they stepped in. And I find it remarkably efficient if you make yourself just a little bit vulnerable and ask, right? Now, I think you need to have that network, right? If you have the network, then it's a lot easier. But I've even found in situations where I didn't know someone all that well, they were very open and they were very helpful. When I came into this role 3 years ago, I reached out to a number of my clients and people in my ecosystem around, advice around running a massive business. And like not one person even remotely shied away. And so I find that comforting that, like, as a business community, as a business ecosystem, people want to help people, right? Generally speaking, right? On your point around specifically clients, what I find with clients and what makes us successful and what makes us, on the leading edge of management consulting is, I think when you're going to a client, it's actually important to have a point of view. So not only do you understand their business, their sector, their competitive landscape, and how and the environment that they're operating in, but to actually bring a point of view that, hey, knowing your sector, knowing your company, knowing macro trends that may impact the industry or your company, here are some things where we think you could create value if you did A, B, and C. And generally speaking, what I find with CEOs, at least, I spend a lot of time with CEOs, is CEOs are very focused on how do they grow their companies. CEOs are very focused on having the most efficient operating models. CEOs are very focused on risk and compliance, right? And how do they sort of keep their companies safe, be it cyber, what have you. And CEOs are very focused on how they drive those three things underpinned by technology. So my job as a consultant, as someone who's running a big consulting business, is how do you sort of bring value and how do you bring ideas to make those companies more successful? And in some ways, one of the things I tell our team is it's one thing to problem solve, it's another thing to problem pose, right? Problem pose is when you're going to a company with, hey, these are some things that you may not be thinking about, right? And you may want to sort of share insights and ideas around how do you make that company better, right? Across that axis I talked about.
Neil, maybe this might help. I'm sorry, let me just, when people hear management consulting, they understand the concept. But can you maybe give a little bit for, people who are watching a little bit more, like what exactly does that mean? What does that entail? And particularly for yourself, let's say you worked in M&A, you work in, private equity. What's like a day like? Like, how does this, what really goes on behind the scenes? And you don't need to name, clients or anything, but just so people can visualize like what it's like.
I think, well, first of all, the term management consulting, I think has like both positive and negative connotations, right? When I hear the term management consultant, I think about like flying around the country, going to boardrooms and espousing like, ideas around strategy, right? And some of that, right? But more importantly, I'm in the business of making companies better and better across two big axes. One is to deliver better outcomes, and two is to actually help drive their trust agenda. But like those are like the two big things, right? How do you drive outcomes, better outcomes? How do you grow your company? How do you make your company more efficient? How do you sort of balance risk? And how do you sort of bring technology to life, right? In an ROI type of mentality, I've done M&A for the most of my career, so that ROI mentality of delivering outcomes. And then the other thing that has just become more and more important, arguably it's always been important, but in today's day and age where things are so efficient on social media and the like, is the currency of trust. That a company must be trusted in what it does. And trust comes in a lot of different formats. And if trust is broken, it could destroy value very, very quickly. So those are the things that we talk about a lot within the walls of PwC. And then also things we talk about, quite openly with our clients around delivering both outcomes and delivering on the notion of trust.
I mean, in order to be in such close contact and build that trust, I mean, good feedback necessarily is a key component. Can you walk us through the kind of key pillars as you see it to good feedback?
I think I just came out of a meeting, actually, ironically, guys, about an hour and a half ago, where we talked about something similar. I got a similar question, so I'll give you the same answer I gave my team. So I think some of the things that we always need to strive for is it's always good to cite facts, right? Now I'm an M&A person, so I always go back to facts, right? But like, it's always good to have your bearings on the facts because facts can drive sort of the positions you're going to take. I also think it's also very, very important that we're in the business of actually truth telling versus just pleasing. I think sometimes we're always trying to please. And with that, I think sometimes it's okay to actually have, and most times it's okay to have a strong point of view. Now, your client or your staff may not agree with you, but people will respect you more if you have a point of view. So those are the things. It's always got to be backed up by facts. right? You don't always have to please everyone, okay? I.e. truth telling. And then lastly, that whole notion of actually bringing a point of view, right? And backed up by facts, right? So that's the framework that I use. That's the framework that I just went through with my team, and that's the mindset that I come in with things.
Can you give us a sneak peek into just that meeting because it was so fresh? What other kind of tips did you share with your team in terms of um, advice in terms of leveling up your career or having those hard conversations? Because it seems like, to be able to have that environment, you need to have a culture where there are no politics, right? Where people just trust that, what they say and what they, mention as, weaknesses won't be used against them later. How did you build that culture of trust and building people up?
Well, I think one thing, Rick, we have to start with is there's going to be some form of politics in any organization, right? Um, so I actually kind of look past that, and I'm a big believer of efficient markets. And when I say efficient markets, I do think that we need to create environments to allow people to be their best, and again, efficient markets take over. And with that, the whole notion of feedback is a gift, right? I think is a critical component of creating efficient markets so people could become their best. I really believe that. I really believe that. So you have to absorb that mindset that feedback is not just something that's a checklist item and you move on, but how do you give real feedback with the underpinning that you're making someone better, what you're making someone better, okay? And that I think is what drives the culture of an organization. That's certainly what drives our culture here. And with that, because I think generally speaking, people want to get better. People generally want to get better. So one example I gave this specific group of individuals is when you're in a meeting or you're in a year-end feedback session and someone says, everything's great, right? Keep on doing what you're doing. Push to get feedback around, well, thank you, but what are 3 things that I could have done differently, right? How can I move my game from whatever level I am up 1 or 2 levels, okay? To push individuals, and by the way, generally speaking, if you push, if they're in that environment, the dam will break and you'll actually get really good, solid feedback. I also think people are always running, like we're all busy, we're all running, right? So it's easy to say, everything's great, right? Keep on doing what you're doing. And you got to pause, you got to force the pause to get that real feedback. So those are some of the things that I think about. I had another meeting earlier today about a proposal that we just delivered, a client proposal. And I asked the team, hey, how'd it go? And team said, great. Great. And
of course, right?
Like, yeah. Like, how many times do you come back and say a proposal went really bad? Right? So,
it was terrible.
So my job as a leader then is to push and say, okay, like what could we have done differently? Maybe what could we have done a little bit better, right? And that having that discussion, having the time to have that discussion, then allowed us to have some concrete follow-up actions, right? Because the client hasn't made up their mind yet, right? I mean, the proposal was yesterday. They're going to meet some others as well over the next couple of days, over the week. Is then you can kind of stay in front of things, right? But you got to force that. It could have been very easy to say, okay, that's great. Sounds like the proposal went great. Let's move on to the next proposal, versus the whole notion of actually really forcing yourself and creating a comfort within the team that people could talk openly. I think it's really, really important that there's that culture around everyone feeling that they could be open and they could talk freely and there's no retribution. And that's where you get really well-functioning teams.
Psychological safety, right? Where
Psychological.
yeah. Hey, this might sound like a dopey question. Bear with me, because you've worked private equity, M&A, investment banking. Like, so when you transition to a different, sector, how do you then kind of, because you're giving advice as a management consultant, do you just do a deep dive into it and just like heads down and learn everything you can about that space before you start doing something? Like, how does that work?
I'll answer that in two ways.
Yeah.
So, yes, to what you just said, right? And I'll give you a couple of real examples. I'm doing a lot of things around climate, in our firm. Now, granted, I'm more in an executive sponsor type of role to help build a team and bring it to life. And, we're doing some great things. The team is incredible. But I'm not a climate expert. I'm not a climate expert. I tell my team I'm not a climate expert. But my job is to, bring market insights because I'm seeing a lot of executives at the most senior levels. I'm talking to my team around, what I'm hearing in the marketplace because of my role. Okay. I'm actually seeing how climate plays out at the clients that I'm at. Okay. Uh, and then more importantly, I've done a lot of homework around the topic. So my team knows that I'm vested on the topic. And then over time, the nature of work that we do, it's a flywheel effect, and actually you get, better and stronger, and you get to see different things. And the beauty of our business is we're constantly dealing with world-class clients that want to improve their respective businesses. So that's one bucket, right? And I think it goes squarely, Jack, to what you said. And I think also being open-minded with the vulnerability of like, okay, it's okay to learn. We're all here to learn, right? I'm in a position where I got to learn, right? I mean, that's all good. The second thing is to build strong teams around you. Okay. And not everyone on the team has to have the same exact skills. You may need a technical person, a market person, a person that's going to be the person that always gets stuff done, right? Like you got to have different ingredients, and that's what makes a team go. And I've come to recognize, appreciate, and really embrace diversity of thought and experiences, and just life experiences to bear when you put a team together. Like to make sure you have a well-rounded team, and that well-rounded team then helps drive whatever the topic is. So those are the two lenses that I look at when dealing with the topic.
And I guess that could be applied to anybody, right? Where if you, switching within your job, no matter what level, to kind of use that game plan to kind of learn, absorb. And so, because you hear a lot about imposter syndrome. So someone just jumps in and they feel, oh my gosh, I'm not doing it. But you do the homework, you build a team around you, you learn, you grow. And like you said, then you have that flywheel, and then you know it, and you're just immersed with everything.
And listening, like that's a very important skill that I think sometimes is pretty basic, but sometimes I think we're always sort of off to action, right? Versus actually listening and paying attention, and actually embracing what the environment is, and then figuring out how you're going to play in that environment.
Now, what do you do if you find yourself in a place where that culture doesn't exist, where people don't have that psychological safety, or people don't listen, or people like use, what you say against you? Like, how do you navigate that difficult situation?
So that exists, that flat out exists, and you have to recognize the environment that you're in. You have to recognize how you may effectuate change, because at the end of the day, and by the way, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to do it yourself, right? So understanding, everyone else that's playing in the ecosystem, and then working towards, well, how do you change the ecosystem? Because generally speaking, people want to be in environments where they're sharing, they're learning, they're getting better, they're getting real feedback. That it's not a fear culture, it's a learning culture. And with that, you may have one or two bad apples that are creating an environment that's maybe not that healthy. But generally speaking, if you observe and see the environment that you're in, and then generally spend time with the people that are in the ecosystem, you're able to move the needle in a positive way, right? And then also find out who are the key influencers in that ecosystem, because a lot of times what I find is when you talk about it, sometimes one-on-one, you quickly find out that people want to make change. They just don't know how. And then, if you're band together to some point, you're able to have a better chance about effectuating change. It's not easy. It's not easy,
Yeah.
right? But at least it gives you a better chance to move the ball in the right direction.
I love that advice in terms of like being able to kind of like find your allies, because oftentimes you aren't the only one around, and that could probably go a long way in terms of building your personal board of directors, as you mentioned, right?
Right.
People that kind of think similarly or can help advocate for you, or you can kind of return the favor and kind of advocate for them as well.
That's right. That's right.
Got it. I mean, looking through your career, and I love making a habit of asking folks this, but was there a particular transition or promotion that was the most challenging to earn? And how did you kind of get over that hump and accomplish it?
I'd say, so I spent my first 5 years working down the street from the house I grew up in, right? So in northern New Jersey, right? And great experience, great client base. And it was a pretty darn safe environment. And I learned a ton, loved it, loved it, loved it. One of the things I decided after that stint is I wanted to do something very different. And I had a great mentor at that point. I'm not even sure I knew what a mentor was back then, but there was an individual who helped me, who I'm still in touch with, and is a very close friend and mentor of mine, who brought the idea of potentially working overseas. And I went overseas and I worked in our London office. I went on to work for 6 years in our London office, and I got to work in a different country. I worked all across Europe. So although I was based in London, I did work all across Europe and actually in the Middle East. And that was a massive learning curve, because it was a massive learning curve personally, because I had not spent that much time outside of the US before that. And it was a massive learning curve professionally, because I had just entered the world of advising on M&A activity, and that's a very different ecosystem. And that was probably the first time that I really, was thrown into the proverbial deep end, right? And trying to figure out how to make things happen. Subsequently, I've had, a number of other different experiences, like, making partner in our firm. That's a big deal. And, there's a big learning curve there. Some of the leadership roles I've taken on since then, there's been, learning curves. But I'd say the biggest learning curve was that experience as a young professional moving from, northern New Jersey to London and working in a totally different environment, learning totally different cultures, and learning a totally different skill set in helping companies with M&A activity.
Wow. I mean, what was it like navigating the different kind of, I'm sure there was like corporate culture and just like general culture in terms of working abroad. Like, how did you make that transition? Like, at what point did it finally click and say, oh, I actually feel in the groove now. I feel comfortable doing what I'm doing and living where I'm living.
Rick, it took like, 12 to 18 months. I
Okay.
was there. Yeah, I was there as a young staff person. My first deal was in a non-English speaking country. So imagine that. So I'm working on
Yeah.
M&A work. I hadn't really done M&A work previously, and I'm dealing with, a different language where everyone else was speaking a particular English language. And I had never really been in that many environments where English was not the dominant language.
Oh
And
boy.
I was like, wow. And then my second deal, was in the Middle East, and very different cultures, and got to experience a very different culture. So for me, it took it took 12 to 18 months to sort of settle in and actually really embrace change. Right now, we always have to be open-minded to change, but it's really embrace change and lean forward into change. Right, and I've done that ever since.
Yeah, I don't mean to go into detail, but did you kind of learn the language? How did you communicate? What did you do?
I learned the basics. So it was a 6 month deal. It was
Yeah.
a 6 month deal, and I was dangerous enough. Or I was dangerous enough by the end of the 6 months to
Wow.
understand what was going, and to figure things out. But again, it was exciting, right? I mean, at first I had a knot in my stomach around how am I going to learn a new skill and a new language, and then over time, like, things worked out. I mean, that's the other thing too. Things work out, right?
Well, do you
But
have that
like,
personality? Because some people have a personality that they're like more leaning towards optimism, and like I could figure it out somehow, all fall into place. Where others have that negative default, like,
yeah.
oh, this is not going to work. This is terrible. Does that help? Is that because you seem like a very positive, upbeat kind of person? Do you think that helps a lot in business by having that
I
mindset?
well, I think it helps in life. I am a half glass full person.
Mhm.
Some will argue that I'm a half. I'm not even a half full. I'm a glass full person. But I just think it's a healthy way to sort of look at things,
Mhm.
and generally, I feel you're never as good as your best day, and you're never as bad as your worst day, right? That and some of this stuff, like, you have to take it in stride, and always look to get better. So I always bring that mindset of at least being glass half full.
It makes a lot of sense.
No, I love that reminder, and it's kind of a testament to what the power of grit and optimism, but also kind of seeking out those opportunities and kind of making luck for yourself. That's kind of been a through line in your career, if I may say so myself. So I really appreciate you, Neil, for walking us through your career and kind of sharing these pearls of wisdom for all of us.
Oh, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on. This was
Oh,
great. I
I'll
really
put you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. This was really nice. I really appreciate it, because by talking about your career journey, like, you gave so much actionable advice to people, which is what we try to do, which is great. And you come across like a regular guy, so people feel, wait, I can kind of do this stuff. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, like, I'll interview people and you look and go, wow, I can never do that. But sometimes you meet people say, wait, you know what? This is doable. So I think a lot of people be inspired,
Yeah.
by this conversation, and that's what we're trying to do. So I'm so glad that you came on the show, and this is fantastic. I really
Oh, thanks,
appreciate
guys.
it.
And it is doable. You're right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's awesome. Well, thanks so much. And then I gotta follow up with you because I gotta finish that article. So we'll kind of,
Terrific. Yes.
yeah, work on that. And yeah, Rick, any last words, or we don't want to
No,
keep peppering him. We asked him enough questions. We don't want to keep bothering him. So he's a busy man. Uh, well, thank you again. This was awesome. So I'm glad to see another New Jerseyan do really well and be successful. So this is good. So this is cool. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
thanks,
Thank you,
Neil.
Take care,
guys.
guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
That's it for The Blind Ambition. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.